Thanks so much for joining us online. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day, but it's always good to switch everything off. So I hope you've had just a productive morning. You've checked in with everybody, got through a little bit of work, but switched everything off, and you're ready to do a bit of greenfield thinking around some really interesting content. I'm sure it's very pertinent to you all. Understanding the new era of cybersecurity facing a decentralised workforce. So my name's Matthew Egan. I'm the editorial director of Innovators Media. As always, it's a pleasure to be here. On behalf of Kyocera and Huon IT, we welcome you. Just before I kick off, I would like to acknowledge the traditional landowners which this session's being produced. It's a wonderful day in Sydney on Gadigal land, so the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I pay my respects to elders past and present, as well as any elders or emerging leaders that might be with us online. We've got a really good session for you this morning. A lot of it's going to be discussion based. There's some high level ideas. There's some different areas of security that you might not have been considering. And very much looking to bring it all together for you with some really good takeaways around your security strategy. No doubt security is a challenge in every organisation, but given some of the resources and even the skill sets that are available to a lot of organisations, it does really seem like a daunting task. So I'm looking forward to hopefully shining a light on that. I'll do a quick tech and ops check before I introduce the presenters today. Look, so it's 2022. We've all got PhDs in digital events, but this is all browser-based today. So if you have any issues with your audio or your video, the best thing to do is just refresh the browser, and that'll be good to go. Alternatively, you can send a private chat to my colleague Simon online, and he'll be able to sort you out. On that note, I'm just going to pop in a little hello to everyone in the chat. Feel free to say hi. Let us know where you're dialing in from. I'm sure you might not get me jealous today, actually. It's a pretty good spot to be in, but let us know where you are around ANZ. We'd love to hear from you, and throughout the whole discussion. So like we do like to build some energy and know we're talking to the right points. So at any point in time, feel free to pop a question through. Or even a comment. So there'll be some polls and things like that. So anything on your mind around the subject matter, we'd love to hear from you. Another note as well is we're giving away a best question prize, and we are transitioning to the metaverse here. So the Oculus Quest is your best question prize today. The rules are pretty simple, as per usual. Make them curly, stress out the presenters, leave them thinking and self-reflecting, and you'll get the prize. So at any point, feel free to jump on in and check that out. On that note, we've got a really great group of presenters today, so I'll just do a quick walkthrough. So kicking off the session with myself will be Mark Vella. So he heads up marketing and strategy at Kyocera Document Solutions. And then we're going to be hearing from Lindsay Rhodes and Dinesh Kumar Agarwal. So Lindsay's the head of client advisory services for Huon IT, and Dinesh is the founder and chief information security officer from CyberPulse. So we definitely have some great minds being brought together to have a look at this content. So very much looking forward to it. On that note, Mark, I might actually kick off and get you to say hello.
Hi everyone. I really appreciate everyone joining, and hopefully you get a lot out of the session.
Yeah, awesome, Mark. So we'll probably kick off here. As I said, there's a little bit to work through on the agenda, but I think that we've kind of picked the biggest challenges of the day. So we're going to be having a look at the work from anywhere culture, and then also the increased staff turnover that's creating security weaknesses. So essentially, no organization is a moat anymore, and most organizations do deal with transient workforces. We're also going to have a look at digital transformation and that move to hybrid work and what that really means when you're sort of, connecting with your cloud services and sort of, identifying more vulnerabilities as you're looking to drive more innovation. And then a little bit of a holistic, I like this one, holistic approach to reduce risk. A lot of things in security started off with sort of endpoint solutions, so it's really good to sort of take a step back and say, what is it that we can do around our security posture and a bit of strategy that can help reduce our risk. And then finally, just having a look at the cyber threats themselves. So the gaps and opportunities before they take hold. You do need that insight, but it is also about sort of standing on the shoulder of giants, so to speak. So the guys will be able to walk through some good solutions there. So, Mark, we might sort of kick off and sort of set the foundation for this one a little bit more. We're talking about security in the digital age. There's been a lot of, obviously, change over the last 2 or 3 years, and security has really risen as a key area of concern for businesses. Ultimately, because as I mentioned before, there's no longer that sort of infrastructure that's sort of securing your business, particularly as most of our businesses have become digital business models and require flexibility and need to drive efficiency. What are some of your observations around the sort of top security concerns facing IT and security teams?
Yeah, Matthew, thanks for the introduction and sort of scoping out what we want to touch on today. I guess the decentralized workforce, it's the norm now, isn't it? It's here to stay. We're kind of really pushed in that direction with the initial COVID lockdowns. Initially, I think businesses were probably thinking it was going to be a temporary measure. Let's just keep the business running. I think we surprised ourselves on how well we were able to work in as a decentralized workforce. But now that it's here to stay, I guess we need to go back and reflect on that and see, now that it's here to stay, I think there's more emphasis now on the need for increased security in that environment, more than ever before. The main thing about a decentralized workforce is people need to be able to work anywhere, anytime, and that increased demand on mobility also increases the threats and the complexity of cyber threats. So today's all about talking about businesses really need to be a lot more robust and agile and be able to come up, have a holistic plan that focuses on end-to-end data security and protecting against cyber threats. I might just pass over to Lindsay. What he's going to wrap up today as we talk, is having a total cyber response plan across your network and end-to-end points.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Matthew, as well. And good morning, everyone. So I suppose, as Mark's just alluded to as well, obviously there was that breakneck move into work from home, work from anywhere over the last couple of years. And unfortunately, as some of those moves have been done fairly rapidly in order to keep the business turning, those security gaps have been fairly numerous. And unfortunately as well, then malicious parties obviously have taken good advantage of those as well. I think one of the key things I remember from a stat from last year that I recall was that there was actually a 50% increase in cyber attacks between 2020 and 2021, which is not an insubstantial number. We've certainly seen that at the coalface across the clients and that we work with as well. So interestingly as well, with that move to, as you said, Matthew, as well, around the cloud services and leveraging as a service platforms, because it was a quick and easy adoption to get things moving. It's not just been end customers that have been targeted in this, it's also been the platforms, the vendors themselves, because obviously that then has a much greater effect. And some notable ones there that you might have heard of have been SolarWinds had a massive breach. Kyocera, we had Log4j, which was a vulnerability that was fairly incredibly widespread, actually. And even Microsoft. All right, so they've had their fair share of vulnerabilities that have come through. Print Nightmare, there was an Exchange vulnerability at one point. So yeah, we're sort of seeing this major reputational damage to the vendors as well. And it's not just those top tier ones, it's also a lot of more industry specific vendors that have been targeted and that's then had a massive impact on their clients. So yeah, I suppose we'll go into more detail today on some subsequent information, but again, sort of circling it back to the cyber response plan, obviously at a high level, you're starting with assessments and understanding what the current state, what the current risks are. We sort of approach really with a 3 lens of, the people, the policy, and the technology. So there's sort of 3 pillars. I think they each enable each other as well. Certainly, prioritization of the risks that are uncovered. Again, I think you're very much hoping for the best, but planning for the worst in any of these. But likewise, certainly really important. I mean, you need the input, the involvement, and the support from C-levels and boards where applicable as well. It needs to be something that's, not just pushing up, but also pushing down to make sure that this is really top of mind. And I guess my last point here is probably just that it's not a set and forget process. You don't just do an audit, fix a few things, and then say, yep, it's all right, Bob, and move on. It is very much an ongoing and a circular process where you need to keep reassessing. You need to keep on top of the new risks and the new threats that unfortunately come out every day. So we'll go into a lot more detail later in the session. But Matthew, I think it's back to you now. Actually, I think there might be a poll that we're going to kick off with.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about sort of the holistic approach. Interesting to see sort of, how many security vulnerabilities there are. And we wanted to throw one up that's pretty specific. And I'm wondering sort of, where the audience is sitting on this one. Is your print security a priority? Keeping in mind that decentralized workforce, working from home, it's a part of a lot of this is in part of existing processes that were in-house and then now moving out. I might just pop this up and just sort of see where the audience is sort of sitting. Sort of at that moderate risk level, but high. Yeah, that's really interesting. It's good to know that, the majority of people on the call are sort of considering it as being a vulnerability. I'm sure a tough one to manage. Is that right, Mark?
Yeah, I think so, Matthew. Now that we're balancing the return to the traditional office and also offering remote working, and every office environment is probably looking differently. I still know of many businesses that are still 100% remote, and many businesses are having days in the office and days work from home. So with that in mind, I think we need to really go back and think about how quickly we set up that home office environment when we were pushed into it. We quickly sort of equipped everyone with a laptop. Latest, generally, they'll be updated with security software. But when you think about print and scan, back then, I wonder what governances, if any, were put in place to assess what devices were going to be accessing the network. And if we think about the home office pre-COVID, the devices that were purchased for that purpose were more around, occasionally I might do a bit of work from home and print some documents out, but it was more around the kids, and they're going to print their assessments out and their homework. So you think about the devices that were bought for printing and scanning were more around bought on price, and probably not there wasn't many considerations around what security features were on that device, and probably even more risky is that we started working from home, so we dusted off the old device, which has probably been sitting there for 6 years, hardly being used. So that old technology is really going to be susceptible to security threats because security features on devices have come a long way since that 5-6 years ago. So that really leaves businesses exposed to severe security threats if the device remains unprotected and unmonitored. I think the main thing we need to remember is that every device connected to the network, especially remotely, can be an endpoint security risk.
Definitely.
Yep.
It's also about sort of monitoring it and like it's almost like that extension of your business as well, isn't it, Mark? Like it's funny to think about, and I'm really unsure how many. Yeah, as you said, during that period of COVID, like how much consideration was made, and then now we're sort of flowing through with it. So on that note, like when we're looking at this particular endpoint, what are some of the key takeaways that you could give the audience just to sort of move forward with?
Yeah, look, I was pleasantly surprised to see that the good portion of the audience was saying that print and scan is still high on the list, and I love to think that's our Kyocera customers that have joined us, and we've spoken to them about the need to upgrade devices and making sure that they are secure. But for those who aren't currently thinking about it, I guess everyone knows a computer and the security risks that are on a PC or a laptop. But you need to think about the device. It also stores data. It has an internet connection. So that too is a vulnerable point in your security plan or potential security hacking. So, if you think about hackers on a device, they can potentially hack into documents you've printed, scan data, even things you've copied. So, and if you think about, probably I'll say from our research, the documents that people print and scan today are generally the more important documents because they want to keep them and store them. So I guess that's even more valuable data that you don't want to fall into the wrong hands. So, and the problem we have now with remote working is that those devices are often forgotten about. We know they've got the company laptop at home, but they're using their own infrastructure at home. So I guess that what I'm saying is that they're being left off the considerations in many cases. So, for my first point today is in the decentralized workforce, we need to go back and assess the level of security that those devices at home provide. There's simple things like, is the data encrypted that's on the device, or does it have a periodic wiping of that data? Those things you do find on business-ready devices, but sometimes they're not, or it's not always a feature that's available on the low-end devices, and certainly not aging devices that have been sitting there for a long period of time. And the second one is now that we're printing and scanning remotely, we need to think about the authentication of releasing those jobs. So we should be IT managers should be thinking about permissions. So to release those jobs, you could be printing to the office remotely. It needs to be authenticated to release those jobs. You can fall into the wrong hands internally or even worse, externally. So a strong consideration around software that can do that should be part of the security plan.
Yeah, great. It's an interesting one, and it's about sort of backtracking before you can move forward. I think it's really good to uncover and highlight the challenges around this space, and probably not uncommon for a lot of organizations that are working a lot more with IoT and different devices. So get that discussion going, and thanks so much, Mark, for that overview. I might do a call out on the audience. We haven't had too many questions come through yet, so just a little slight one before I hand over to Lindsay and Dinesh. Make sure that you're getting those through, because we'd love to hear from you and maybe hear about some of your experiences around this area. Probably just finally, Mark, sort of the way forward. You keep talking to that holistic piece. What have you seen with your customers? What have you seen work at the moment? And just keeping in mind that it is hard to drive a scale with security at the moment. Like, I think that's the biggest challenge and feedback that you hear from executives. Definitely having to do more with less.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. I think probably one of the key things is that IT probably need to take control back of the devices connecting to the network. It's important that they're aware of what's connecting in remotely. And print and scan needs to be part of that holistic plan. I believe in some cases it is forgotten about. and also they need to keep track of what's being plugged into the network. So they need to consider staff movements, who's been using what device and for what. Many of these things can be achieved simply by having, as I mentioned, a business-ready device that provides encryption of data. And also the latest in print and scan software will give them visibility of the devices. They can put authentication requirements together so jobs just aren't printing out anywhere. And also will give them visibility of or set rules around a number of prints that can be done, and they can keep track of that.
Yeah, great, Mark. That's a really good overview there, and probably an awesome segue to bring in Lindsay and Dinesh. Let's have a look at sort of, we've kicked off with some of the key areas, but be interested to hear a bit more about the holistic approach.
Yeah. Thanks, Matthew. And before I go over to Lindsay and Dinesh, I guess probably my last takeaway that I wanted to mention when we talk about customer trends, probably the biggest trend we're seeing at the moment is this post-COVID, people had an opportunity to assess their careers. And I think every business I talk to is there's this massive spike in staff attrition. And I know Lindsay will talk to this as well, but we need, I guess we need to think about what that means in a decentralized workforce, where when people left the business before, it was done in a very controlled environment, where they handed back their PC. The data was all controlled internally. The data sat in the business, and obviously all the print and scan devices sat there as well. But now when they leave, they do hand back their PC or laptop again. But what happens to that data that's sitting in the home office? So that's another consideration in this big spike we're seeing in staff attrition that many businesses are dealing with today. So that's about the endpoint security. As Matthew said, we're going to throw over to Lindsay and Dinesh now, and they're going to talk about the holistic plan, what we should be thinking about. So over to you, Lindsay.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark, and thank you, Matthew, as well. So, yeah, certainly very much reiterating what you've just said there, Mark, as well. I think, again, we've seen across our clients the need for, and we'll go into further detail later, but that great resignation that's been occurring recently has certainly had an impact on the level of security and where the data has been residing. The pure volume of it has certainly been in some cases, 50 or 100% turnover in the space of a year in terms of some areas of staffing is pretty unprecedented as well. So, secondly, as well, before we go into I suppose the details of the next section is shadow IT. So we've had that been bubbling away in the background for a while. What that basically was when a part of the business decided that they needed a function, they needed a online collaboration tool, and they could just go out, purchase it on the web for, could be free, could be $5 a month or whatever, and then start putting business data into these silos. So again, that's always been a concern and a risk, but now even more so, because in many cases with a distributed workforce, you've got people that are doing that are using a tool that has not been vetted in any way by IT or the business, and are now using that as part of their line of business for that, for their role. And in many cases, it could be that an employee comes and goes from the business and never sets foot in an office, or maybe does so once or twice. So reining that back in, I'll go into a bit more detail about zero trust and things later. But yeah, all of these have been really top end concerns for ourselves and our clients for some time. Well, thank you again. I will just jump on to the next slide. And Dinesh, I'll be keen for your input on some of these areas as well. But again, holistic, there's a lot to go through. So we'll start with, I guess, a bit of an assessment of where we are now and what we've seen the last couple of years to set the scene. But certainly the ransomware, we've all heard of it. We've all hopefully not experienced it, and if we have, it's been something that's able to be recovered from. But again, it continues to be the main tool by which attacks are occurring. To give some context here as well, At I think the end of 2021, it's a $14 billion industry in terms of ransomware and the dark web sort of side of that. So there's certainly plenty of incentive there for them to keep doing what they're doing because it works. 61% of the attacks of 2021 were driven by ransomware. So it's certainly a main vector there. I'll quickly go through these and then I might pass over to you, Dinesh, as well, if that's okay for your inputs. But I think, yeah, remote and cloud attacks, again, coming back into that elevated and expedited use of cloud tools in the last couple of years, particularly. There was a vulnerability in Microsoft Teams recently as well. There was one in Zoom last year, if I recall. So again, it's key to make sure that you're limiting the exposure from those applications. And once again, you're limiting the applications that your staff can use to ones that are designated as business driven. Thirdly, I think in terms of certainly the account takeovers and compromising, that credential theft is still very rife, right? And it has been throughout this whole process. What we're seeing in this is really a strong move away from passwords in the traditional sense. We're going to very complex and distinct passwords or passphrases, but also obviously multi-factor authentication on absolutely everything. Why does the bank have multi-factor to log into their systems, yet someone could log into yours without some sort of a check and balance? I think that's, certainly a multi-factor has been one of the main streams that have been a fairly low-hanging fruit for people to adopt. And also compliance, auditing, even client obligations in terms of contracts that you have with your clients have had that as just a prerequisite. It's no longer an option there by any means. 0-day exploits are still a real a real challenge as well. And again, that's where it's it's an unknown, or it might be known, but there's not yet a patch developed for it. And until that vulnerability has actually been mitigated, the hackers can really get in and cause a lot of damage. So certainly a key consideration there. Fileless attacks, again, getting back to the endpoint statements that you were making, it's really quite I think quite key there that a lot of these threats don't have it's not like a malware file that you got sent or that you downloaded somewhere as the primary means there. It can be basically something that piggybacks on an existing software. It runs in memory. It doesn't need to install anything, and it gives them a foothold, a beachhead into your environment, and then they can set themselves up to be in there for the long term and ultimately harvest data or cause more damage. So, and lastly is phishing attacks. So I think one of the key things that we've seen as an uptick in the last couple of years as well, in response to this, has been cyber awareness training for users. Right, so never click on the email kind of thing. If there's a link in there, down to also asking those emails that ask for change of billing information and things like that. Mary and Bob aren't necessarily sitting next to each other in an office and can turn around and say, does this look good to you or not? When you're working remotely, every employee is almost their own silo at certain points in time, and they can either be an asset or a liability. And that's very much driven by the support and the training that you can give them. So yeah, these are, I suppose, a few of what we've seen in the last couple of years that have really ramped up in prevalence as well. Dinesh, I'd like to pass over to yourself, if I may, for any comments.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. Good morning, everyone. So, as Lindsay mentioned, I would like to focus first on ransomware, and some of these are very interrelated. For example, phishing is one of the attack vectors through which ransomware happens. Similarly, account takeovers are another way through which ransomware happens. But let me focus on some of the things that you can do to avoid ransomware attacks. So, based on what we are seeing in the industry, some of the things that happens is when ransomware happens, you don't really have any time to respond. Within few minutes, everything is encrypted. So we should be focusing on technologies which can auto respond rather than being dependent on human beings and trying to investigate and going on and on, because by that time everything will be encrypted. So focus on technologies which can respond back by themselves. And another one is having isolated backups, which we find a lot of time people don't have backups. And also a lot of time I have seen when we are asked to respond to something like that, people really don't have any logs. So please remember, whenever there is a security incident, if you don't have logs, then the investigation guys, they just can't do anything without having any logs, without having that kind of information. It's really difficult to investigate. So that's really important that you have a logging system in place where everything is going at a central place. There are a lot of other things that I can keep on adding, but I would like to continue to the next slides and then take it forward from there. But yeah, please, if you have any questions specific to ransomware or any of these attack vectors, feel free to put it in the chat, and we would like to see if we can answer those during this session. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Dinesh. So I think, yeah, probably wrapping up on this as well, as you've said, there's mitigations in place for many of these. Again, security is not 100% guarantee ever. Really what we're looking at, and what we'll go through further detail shortly, is really around limiting that threat surface, right? It's about making it as hard as possible from the get-go. But then also understanding that it's almost like a pyramid. So you can have your security at the top and there's different levels, and really upside down pyramid almost. So when you get to that pointy end down the bottom, as Dinesh just alluded to, in a lot of these events where we've had good siloed and secured backups, frequency of backups, it really becomes a recoverability. In any cyber breach, you don't pay a ransom. You should be having again, cyber insurance and forensics and those sort of elements coming into play to assess as quickly as possible. But then again, coming back to the cyber response plan, is knowing, okay, who to call and in what order, and then ultimately at the end, if something has got in, it's having the ability to recover quickly. That's your last line of defense, and certainly a key consideration there, where seen environments that didn't have that and the impacts were fairly severe. Matthew, I think there might be one more poll before we go to our next section, if I'm correct.
Yeah, we do have one. I'll just get that one up here. Do you know how you will respond to a security incident such as a ransomware attack? Preparedness is often the response, but these things do have a habit of creeping up. Bad times, a lot of people say, always on a Friday afternoon. Interested to see sort of where the market's sitting in this, in terms of how much thinking's been going on around sort of next steps and your incident response. Some people integrate it into their overall sort of risk management, incident business resilience plans. Definitely a trend there. So we'll pop it up. We have no ideas at 60%. We have a security incident response plan, which is tested regularly, or we have a security incident response plan, but it's never tested. I guess the positive thing here is that around 80% of people have a security incident response plan. Little bit of a negative is that for half of those people, it's not tested too often. Is that what you see, Lindsay?
Yeah, that's right. I think it's similar to backup, right? It's only as good as when it's needed, and so certainly, yeah, having that process and that formalized cheat sheet that you pull out when the worst happens is certainly key. But having that as a regular testing regime is even more important. Really, it's making sure that you can act on that when the time comes. So, yes, certainly, I think that's really probably where a lot of that split's probably where a lot of the organisations that we work sit at the moment. They may have not had much until the last couple of years, and again, now putting more emphasis into it, building that out, and then the last step is to make sure that it's a formalized testing regime on the back of it. Yeah, definitely. Well, great. I'll just jump on to the next slide then, if I may. So again, getting into, I think, some of the details here around the I guess the common gaps that we see as well, and how to resolve them, or how to mitigate them as best as possible. I think, yeah, certainly every organization is different. You need to be aware of that as well. But there are certain alignments where gaps that we see across the bulk of the organizations that we work with. As I mentioned before, firstly, never 100%. It's really about limiting that threat vector as best as possible. Again, not a set and forget process. There's new things happening all the time, so it's having that sort of security group that is constantly monitoring and maintaining those and bringing in new mitigations as needed. And lastly, I think as well is that there are some as well, as Mark mentioned before, just even thinking about the end users and the print, where there's data in different silos. So not all of these gaps are something that are that they can be very easily overlooked as well. So again, from a holistic point of view, having that assessment that runs through and the risk registers that run through all of those areas is really key. Just quickly running through here, then I think, yeah, the unknowns is sort of where we start there. I think that you don't know what you don't know in many cases as well. So you can have all the best processes and tools in place, but there can still be gaps by which a malicious action can happen. The work environments, they're constantly evolving, and with this rise of mobile work as well, how we access our environments, how we access the tools, how we do work is fundamentally changed, and there's no putting that ship back in the bottle either. I think this is the new world. Definitely, as I think Mark, you might have mentioned too before as well, the mobile devices, right? So again, the endpoints are now the perimeter of your network, whereas they used to sit inside predominantly. So it's a very fundamental shift there. The having control or limitations about what devices can join have been really key there as well. But again, something that has been adopted very heavily in the last couple of years. From extracting actionable intelligence there as well. So I think another challenge that we've seen is really that consolidating and correlating of all the information. It can be hard to sort of recognize what to look for when you're stuck in the long grass there. So I think it is really in these assessments and in the starting off this process is very much about putting it out into a format and something that's consumable by board, by C-levels, and has the detail to be actioned by IT as well is really key. Again, as a process here, so prioritizing and remediation. So, again, many organizations have been, I suppose, guilty of spot fire checks and putting out a fire here, or putting in a solution just for this bit. So it's very much about, in this holistic review, is coming back and prioritizing and knowing how each of these security components will work together. And that's a really key an important part of the process that we work very, very heavily on. Now, privileged access, and I know Dinesh, you and I speak about this frequently as well, so I might pass to you shortly there as well. But certainly, I think in this case, it's about certainly making sure that it's anyone with privilege is limited, and again, something as simple as when someone leaves the organization is making sure that that user exit process there is very comprehensive as well. I think something that we see as well with again these new software as a service platforms is very much the need for anyone that has certain privileges, or even down to the users themselves, is when you have 10 different applications that you use and they all have their own logins, it makes user in and user out very hard. So it's starting to put, if you're not already, putting solutions in place. You might have heard things like single sign-on, but trying to make that as simple a process to bring people in, as well as to remove them from the business as well. Dinesh, did you have something you'd like to bring to that particular point?
Yeah, especially on privilege access. So that's what we see all the time. It doesn't matter how an attacker gets into your environment. It could be phishing, or it could be like a malware or whatever they do, essentially they are after your information, after your data. And sooner or later, they are trying to target admin accounts because those are the most powerful accounts and they need access to those accounts to exfiltrate information from your environment. So please remember that admin accounts are the prime target of all the attackers, and that's why it is so important to secure them. There are ways and best practices through which that can be done. For example, one of the other thing that we see all the time is people have same local admin password on all the workstations, which means if you compromise workstation, it's like all the other are compromised because you just need to guess one password and game over, because people just keep same password. Simple things like Microsoft Labs can help with that. It's a free tool that comes with Microsoft, so that's a best practice. And while we were studying a lot of attacks, it was mentioned that around 70 or 80% of the attacks can be stopped or taken care if people don't log into their laptops with admin privileges. So if you're, so it is also a best practice that you shouldn't be logging to your laptops using admin account, because if you just take away the admin accounts, a lot of attackers tool doesn't work. So ensuring those things are, that is a good thing that you can do to ensure you are less prone to attacks. And finally, for your admins having domain admin access and having access to your other privilege accounts, it's important that you secure those accounts, you rotate the passwords and other best practices. So yeah, I will say privilege account security should be a very large focus of your security strategy. Yeah, back to you, Lindsay.
Definitely. Thank you very much, Dinesh. That's great. And the last point here is just third-party access. So it's surprising how many of the high-profile breaches have actually been where an attacker used the credential of a third party, for example, or a vendor to get access into an organization's network. So again, it's this push to obviously limiting access or having timed access, for example, but at the same time then looking at multi-factor solutions as well that can be brought into bear there to not just apply to your own staff, but also your vendors or your subcontractors, people that are another attack vector to get into the environment. Matthew, I might just pass back to you briefly. I think we have one last poll that we wanted to run through, if I'm not mistaken.
We do. Let's have a look at this final one. Do you know the weaknesses in your critical infrastructure? No, we have never conducted penetration testing or a security assessment. Yes, while we've undertaken some level of penetration testing, it doesn't cover our entire attack surface. I'm sure it's a surface that's changed a lot as well. And finally, we have not conducted a formal security assessment of our environment to understand our weaknesses and gaps. Let's have a look here. I'd be interested to see. I'd imagine that there'd be pretty good literacy around this one. So around 47% we've undertaken some level of penetration testing. So, but it doesn't cover the entire attack surface. 27% seem pretty comfortable with what they've done there, Lindsay. And it's good to see, as I thought, there's only around 12% that haven't sort of, done anything. Is that sort of, where you see the market sitting?
I think so for a great part. I think certainly compliance and, as I said, contractual obligations to clients have really been driving a lot of these as well. Certainly, I know on Huon's sort of part going through, ISO certifications and things like that, there's a lot of elements that need to be put into place. Where there isn't either of that contractual obligation or some accreditation that needs to be met, funnily enough, it does tend to be that it takes an event occurring to perhaps bring it up to the top of the list, if that makes sense. So again, it's understandable. It's there's many priorities, and certainly the last couple of years, keeping businesses running has really been a challenge, and it's been the main priority. But yeah, I think that is a fairly good snapshot, I think, of certainly where we've seen the industry recently. Perfect. Well, just jumping through the interest time here as well. So I wanted to circle back now to, I suppose, the staff turnover point that Mark, you certainly raised earlier as well there. Now, this is something that we've seen a huge amount of impact to our clients' businesses recently in terms of just the sheer volume of user in and user out that's happened there as well, right? So again, as I mentioned, security has fundamentally changed. You might have users that are sent a laptop, it turns on, you have an auto provisioning system to get it set up for them. They may never set foot in an office. There's many roles now that are being offered as complete work from anywhere, and employees are resonating to that from a work-life balance as well. Now, what does that mean for security in businesses? Certainly, the onboarding and user in and user out process, having that formalized, having that as something that is very much with I suppose, a zero trust focus. And so by that I mean is that you're not just having a blanket user process which gives people rights to the a whole file server or section of the business. It's really about approaching it in a more tailored way of allowing only the minimal amount of resources that person needs to do their role. Okay. Again, limiting that threat surface and the opportunities for something to happen from that side. Certainly, multi-factor authentication, single sign-on around that as well is really key, as I mentioned. So the user comes in, you're not setting them up with 10 different passwords for 10 different systems. Again, looking at how those systems that you have or moving to new ones that can integrate behind a single credential that is then protected. All right, makes the user in and user out process so much more important. And thirdly, as well, endpoint protection. So, we've always heard of antivirus and that's going to save us and all the rest of it. It's really funny now to see that, again, the users are now that perimeter. So we're not seeing as much in terms of, it's still there, but denial of service attacks, trying to smack through a firewall, that it still does occur, and it's generally more targeted now. But you are seeing this huge shift to attacks trying to hit the endpoint. So someone's working on their laptop and they've downloaded or they've clicked on a link in an email, and it's then the endpoint protection of the user's device that is basically protecting your network more than ever now. So certainly in that, I think between those elements and focusing on those, making sure that you do have a very strong, not antivirus, not legacy. It needs to be, what's called EDR or XDR solution now that both protects but also preemptively looks at threats as they're coming in, has smarts in the back end. It's not about waiting 3 days for, virus definitions to download to everyone's machine before they're protected against something new. It's very much a real-time requirement now to keep endpoints protected. But also back to Dinesh's point as well, is about the logging that gives and the ability to see what's happening. If something does get into the environment, these sensors throughout the environment can see where it's traversed, how it's got in, and where it reached. So very key parts there. But again, just on the onboarding and offboarding, so policies, procedures, having those back end elements in check and vetted, certainly from security and employment policies, etc., making sure that you're meeting all the criteria, so that again, can't stop someone from doing something, but you've put in the legalities of what they can and can't do when they're part of your business. Last point here is education as well. As I mentioned before, it's getting them enrolled as soon as possible into a training program, not just training for using the systems, but also how to protect it. So cybersecurity awareness training is a really key point there to have as focus for your staff. Dinesh, was there anything that you wanted to add to my comments there?
No, all good. I think you have covered it well.
Not a problem. Thank you. So next here, just quickly going through, I suppose, from the best practices perspective as well. And again, we can speak to you all in turn to give a bit more detail here. But I think if we look at, I suppose, the the journey here, and again, it's not there's no start and finish, but it is something to sort of show I guess the process from the start through to a good point. So I think, again, from a best practice perspective here, as I mentioned, top down, so board, security is not solely the responsibility of IT anymore. It is a responsibility of the business, and as I said, top down involvement and support is really, really key there. Establishing a cyber committee within the business as well. We have many clients where we have security services involvement, and it's not just, for example, our security coming in and saying, do this, do that. It's a collaborative effort. It's obviously people within the business that are also responsible. I think if we look at, I suppose, the journey there, it's obviously understanding the current, the current risks and the current assessment that needs to be there. I think certainly when we sort of move our way through the process here, it's looking at the risks and obviously what investments are going to be required there to remediate these and priority order applied. I guess number 3 is probably a really key one here as well. It's about having metrics that you can actually measure against. Okay, so I think that, again, the analytics at the simple level, analytics coming from user training, right? So don't feel bad if you enroll into a cyber training and your first result, the percentage is way up here. I've had organizations that thought they were very secure and they've had 50% click through on the first, the first test, failed the first test. You want to see that training is having an effect and that it's top of mind for staff as well. So having meaningful sort of monthly reporting against that, for example, is really key. Understanding the lead times of your patching, because again, these vulnerabilities come out every day. Making sure that your patching's up to date for all the critical systems. And I guess a scorecard as well as a thing there to understand, okay, well, against these critical compliance elements, how are we going? How are we performing against it there is really key. Developing in the procedures for incident response, business continuity, disaster recovery, DRPs, IRPs, BCPs, you've all heard the terms. And they do all interlink as well, obviously. But yeah, really the policy building and the procedures is then building that framework for your response when the worst happens. So certainly something that's incredibly key to consider. And then, yeah, I suppose, again, having some involvement within your individual industries as well from, certainly from your peers as well. So having that collaboration amongst yourselves to understand what other people are facing as well. We see there's real power in that. And it's something that we certainly recommend or help to try to facilitate where we can. Yes, you've got compliance, you've got, ISO certs, etc. But yeah, having that element there is really key. And then obviously it's making sure that your staff are empowered. As we know, it's a real tricky time at the moment. It's a revolving door, but you make a system that is secure, that the staff are well trained, that they enjoy, but are also aware of their responsibilities, is obviously a really key part in retaining key resources for your business as well. Dinesh, was there anything that you'd like to bring in there?
Yeah, so when it comes to security best practices, I like to talk about 3 approaches. The first one is taking a risk-based approach, where it starts with identifying your crown jewels and critical assets, because those are the things where attackers are also going to target you. So you identify your critical assets or crown jewels. Then the next step is you look at attack vectors, what can come in, what can go out, who have access to them, basically what can go wrong. And then you look at existing controls in place against those attack vectors. And finally, you identify the risk and have a plan of action based on that. That's the first approach. The second approach is you assume that there is going to be a breach. Like if you look at the history, even NASA has been hacked, even like RSA has been hacked. So there is no company who can say they can't be hacked. So always assume there can be a breach And when you want to prepare against that strategy, then you need to have an incident response plan, because that will essentially cover how do you respond when something like that has happened. So have a incident response plan with playbooks, test that out, and also encrypt your information wherever you can, especially if it is sensitive information, so that that information is useless to attackers, even if it is stolen. And the last approach is something which everybody struggles with, because we don't have unlimited budget. We have got a limited budget for security, and the way to handle that is you do a security maturity assessment. You know where your gaps are. I like to take an example of human body. Like, if you want to be healthy, you need to have good nutrition, exercise, and sleep. If somebody says he will have good nutrition and good exercise, but he don't care about sleep, of course he can't be healthy. Similarly, in security, there are some basic building blocks, some basic security principles that you should be adhering to. So when you do a security maturity assessment, focus on that and ensure you have a base level of maturity against all the basic building blocks, not just level 5 on one building block and completely ignoring one of the other ones, like for example completely ignoring logging. So ensure you do a good maturity assessment and then spend your money there. That's where you can ensure that you're getting maximum value out of your money. So yeah, that's what I like to mostly point out when we talk about three approaches to best practices. So any questions, if you have, feel free to put it in the chat and we can handle that. Back to you, Lindsay.
Perfect, thank you. Just aware that we are running a little bit short on time here. I'll sort of skim through the last few here. I think the key point of again, some examples of major breaches that have happened is that you can, as you just said, you can be the largest organization on the planet, or you can be a small business. Everyone is a target. Is I think the key point there, and we've certainly seen that across the organizations that we work with as well. Just a very last, I suppose, some key stats here as well to consider is that certainly looking at some of the reports here on the left here, I'd just like to probably point out that certainly from this this recent sort of CEO survey that was done there, my key point here is that there's not a single item here that's say 80% in terms of its effectiveness to stop something or otherwise. It is very much a spread across multiple areas of focus that give you that holistic approach. There's no silver bullet is the key point there. And secondly, as well, to give some context here, is if you look at, I think it was 2020 through to 2021, cybersecurity in terms of the CEO pulse that was taken by KPMG, cybersecurity went from 5th on their list of of importance up to 1st. And I think that really resonates and shows that there is that now awareness, and given the prevalence of the risks and the threats that are happening, that we're now seeing that awareness from C-level down is certainly starting to take effect. Other than that, I suppose, again, when we talk about getting that top-down support there, when we are doing the assessments and I guess the maturity scoring as sort of the first cab off the rank, it's very much having all the technical detail behind so that remediation and prioritization can happen, but equally is having the support and it being able to be consumed by C-level or board. So certainly, as an example here, is sort of putting it in such a way that it can get the awareness and the buy-in from the top down based on putting that information into something that's easily consumable. So again, you have to have their support. That's, I think, coming back around to the end of our information here. We could obviously speak all day on it. There's a fairly large amount of content, but I do thank you very much for staying with us.
Yeah, thanks so much, Lindsay and Dinesh. It was great. I mean, and it's great to just walk through these things and have a conversation around them. Definitely a starting point for a lot of organizations, but then there's also things that people can do to enhance their security posture, which I think you were uncovering as you went, which is great. So we have gone over time, but I'll throw up a couple. I'll just do 2 questions because I really appreciate everybody taking the time to put it through. So I've just picked a couple here. I'll pop this one up first. What have we got? This is from Simon. Our organisation is using the Essential 8 as a guideline for our cybersecurity plan. Is there anything outside of the Essential 8 you feel is a priority to address in your plan? Maybe, yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it, Lindsay? Because it's a great base for a
It's a great
conversation.
base. It's a great base. Yeah, I would put it that way as well. Look, I think certainly in any of the maturity programs or audits that we're doing now, we certainly have sort of NIST frameworks that we follow that are 60, 70 line items as a minimum area of investigation. It has to be fairly comprehensive. I think what the government's done there with the E8 is really trying to pick the top elements that can be your focus, right? So again, compliance drives a lot of this as well, actually. So some organizations there contractually obliged to make sure that they've adhered to E8 and that we've presented a report with the maturity score. It's a nice, simple to consume scoring system with Essential 8 as well, based on the standard scoring. Yes, certainly when we talk about, I think, outside of the E8, yes, there are many, many detailed areas of investigation. As I said, I think, looking at NIST, for example, the 70, 80 even items that need to go through there. So it depends on, again, the level of maturity that you have in the environment to start with, as to, I think, how much detail you have to go into, yes.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's really important as a starting point and a guide. And it is great at sort of highlighting the conversation within your business. This is an interesting one from Sonia we might just put up. Do you have any recommendations as to what percentage of overall IT costs should be allocated to security? I'm sure that this percentage has been changing, but is there any guardrails here? Or is it just all encompassing now and sort of ubiquitous when you are purchasing IT?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sonia, as well. But no, it's not there's no sort of set percentage that I'm aware of. Then again, different organizations are different in their maturity at the time, as well as what their requirements are based upon audit, assessment, risk register, etc. So no, it is something where you need to get that understanding of your current risk, and then make sure that it's prioritized. Because again, you could have a high importance but low maturity item in your environment that is very much the focus, that could be easily resolved with a small commercial element, versus something that's lower down in terms of risk or importance, but has a much higher element of investment required to remediate. So no, there's no silver bullet on that one, unfortunately. Yes.
No, I think but Sonia, the feedback is that maybe if you put things under the security bucket, you might get the budget as well at the moment. So plenty to think about there.
I think it's top of mind. Yes.
Yeah, guys, thanks so much for sharing your insights. I think we covered off on a lot of key important points. As I said at the start, it's good to just sort of take the time and have a little bit of greenfield to think about sort of your next steps, considering there was just so much, like everything was so quick, particularly with the decentralized workforce and things like that. So definitely lots to think about. For everybody online, this one's available. So if you are having this conversation internally, feel free to send it around. Use it to kickstart a conversation with the team and with your broader business. And definitely look to build up the ecosystem. So Dinesh and Lindsay and Mark are all available to have chats around this, and the wider Kyocera and Huon IT team as well. So definitely don't be a stranger and feel free to grab a coffee or a digital coffee with the team. So until next time, a big thanks for your time today. And we look forward to connecting you and keeping this conversation going because it's moving pretty quick. So any feedback that you have around the next session, just let us know. So we really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.